Part 2 of this presentation is going to talk about, now that you have a better understanding of the foundational background of the importance of programmatic assessment data at the institutional level, how to then take that knowledge and now apply it to an assessment plan so that you can gather your data on an annual basis to demonstrate program outcomes, and also look at ways to consider how to benchmark that data against other institutions or against yourself. So we established that we need to use institutional data as it relates to graduation, retention, and employment to help better demonstrate program outcomes. To do this effectively, we must first ask the following questions. First, what do you want to know? Do you want to know about retention within the program, retention within the university, or with retention within peers? Or do you want to compare your retention within your program, how it relates to the university retention rates, or within peers? Next thing you want to know is what's going to be the criteria for success, or the benchmark. This is the determination on how you will understand whether or not you meet your programmatic outcome. Many times when we talk about assessment, programs are very good at defining what the outcome is, but fail to follow up with an appropriate method or measure, and then setting a benchmark to determine whether or not they have achieved success. If you don't know where you're going, it's hard to get there. So it's very important when you determine what the outcome will be that you have an appropriate method, and then after that you have an appropriate criteria for success or benchmark. The next question you want to ask yourself is, how will you get the data? Will you use your Office of Institutional Research website, or will you use the Student Right to Know webpage? If you're not familiar with the Student Right to Know webpage, as a result of the Higher Education Authorization Act, all institutions are to have a Student Right to Know webpage. This webpage is found on every institution's website who obtains federal funding from the government. If you're not familiar whether or not your institution has this or where it's located, poke around on your institution's website, because it should be there. The other way to get your data is an annual request to your Office of Institutional Research. So here we are on our Office of Institutional Research website. As you can see, we have a link. Now this might not be like your institution, but we have a nice link that looks at retention and graduation rates by student demographics and also by department. So if I want to pull up the by department, I would just click on that. So here we are at the Department of Sports Medicine, my home department. And if I look at this information, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the cohort retained, okay, by the second fall, which means, you know, for the individuals that come in 2014, the second fall retention rate for my department is 82.9, okay? And if I look at that, there's a trend that I want to examine for. So you can see we had very good retention, those up in the 90 percentiles, and then we dropped to 82.9%. So the question would be, is this a one-year fluke, or is this going to be a trend we're going to keep seeing? And if it is a trend, what is informing us as the cause of this problem? The green shows our 4-year graduation rates. So if you look in 2011, and we look across the 4-year graduation rate, or fifth fall, we had a 78.3% 4-year graduation rate. And then the blue shows our 6-year graduation rate. So of course, by 6 years, you'd hope to see as close to 100% as possible. And you can see here that we have a 90% graduation rate. So what you want to do is you want to maybe take a deeper dive into those numbers to see what the cause or the root of the problem is. But overall, this is good information for you to have as a program to compare to how you are doing with regard to the institution. So what is the institution's second fall retention rate? What is the institution's 4-year graduation rate? And what is the institution's 6-year graduation rate? You can get that within Office of Institutional Research website, or maybe on your Student Right to Know page. Here's a Student Right to Know page. As you can see, the Student Right to Know was in accordance with the Higher Education Opportunity Act, okay, and reauthorizes as amended. Institutions are required to provide public, easy access to information for students. It's separated into several areas: student information, financial aid, and loans. So if we look at student outcomes, if we click on the College Navigator, the College Navigator is from the National Center for Education Statistics, and this is where IPEDS data is pulled into. So IPEDS is the Integrated Post-Secondary Educational Data System, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit on how you can use IPEDS data to peer benchmark with Carnegie institutions that are similar to you. So those are ways you can get the data, but again, it's important to understand what you want to know. Finally, how does this information inform the other components of your plan? So for instance, if we look back or think back to that sports medicine data I was showing you, why has our retention really dropped within the last year? What is it about our curriculum? But you want to understand how the components of the program outcomes inform the other aspects of your plan. So to answer these questions, how will you get the data? You need to develop outcomes. They're not learning outcomes, but program outcomes. You need to develop assessment measures to determine how you access the data, and then you need to develop appropriate benchmarks to discern whether or not the outcome was achieved. So let's walk through some examples. So as we look at some program outcomes and the assessment methods and the criterion benchmark to kind of pull all this together, if we're looking at retention as a program outcome, the outcome could state that AT cohorts, or whatever the discipline you teach, will demonstrate a positive retention rate when compared to a 3-year average and university-wide retention rates. Again, because depending on your discipline, looking just at the university-wide retention rate may not tell you much, because you might have highly motivated students, and when you put them with the university, it gives a false sense of retention as opposed to looking at just your own program. The assessment method or measure would be a Office of Institutional Research data pull and chi-square analysis, which will look at the differences between the two groups of student retention rates, comparing university-wide and the cohort of students. And then the benchmark or the criterion for success that you set would be that the 3-year average retention rates for third fall will not be statistically significantly different from the university. So we use third fall here because we see a retention decrease not from first to second year, but more between that second and third year. You may also want to look at underrepresented minorities retention. Or if you don't have a lot of underrepresented minority students, you may want to look at underrepresented minority recruitment. So how are you going to increase the retention rates of URM students? And this could be, again, another OIR report of AT URM retention compared to URMs at just at second fall or third fall. The criterion benchmark is that it will not be statistically significantly different from the university or the 3-year average and fall to fall comparison. Graduation rates, again, your outcome may be articulated in that the cohort will demonstrate a 4-year graduation rate that will not be statistically significant in negative direction from university-wide graduation rates. And then again, another OIR data pull. And the criterion for success or the benchmark would be a 4-year graduation rate of AT cohorts will stay at or above the current rate of 90%. So if that was maybe your 3-year average, you want to make sure they stay at that 3-year average of 90%. And if they're dropping below, if it's 1 year, that's okay. Maybe that's okay. If you start to see 2 or 3 years where it's a significant drop, you definitely want to investigate that further. And if you're not looking at this data on an annual basis, you won't know how it informs the other parts of your program. Employment, again, will be successful in gaining employment. And then we have a programmatic survey of graduates 6 months post-graduation. And then this is a little bit harder to follow up because if people don't reply. But for those who reply, hopefully you'd want 100% of individuals who seek employment in the field that you prepared them to have a full-time job, right? And that's what you would expect. So how can all this look in the end, right? So if you're collecting this data, you're then able to put together a chart that looks similar to this, okay? Here you can see you have years worth of data, you have admitted students, you have retained students, you have attrition as related to academics, you have attrition related to academic misconduct, and you have attrition related to non-academic, so things maybe you really can't control. Then you have program completion, and then your percentage. So in the end, you might already have obtained like the retention and the admission and the graduation or completion status from OIR, but maybe you want to dig deeper and understand why students are leaving or what is causing them to leave. And if it is academics, how does that inform your assessment plan? Certain accrediting bodies do require this, None that I'm speaking to today, but I can see in the near future very much of the specialized accreditors asking programs to give this type of data set. So applying this information, what I'd like you to do now on your own is access your institution's Office of Institutional Research webpage and the National Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, the IPEDS website, to locate the following. First, when you're on your OIR website, answer the following questions. What is your program's retention rate for the last 3 years? How does your program's 4- and 6-year graduation rate compare to the institution's rates? Then, I'd like you to look into the IPEDS data, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and discover institutions within your Carnegie classification system. List several institutions. These are institutions that have a similar size and academic offerings that you do at your institution, as well as you can look at them per location. And then, after you define some Carnegie peers, how does your institution's graduation rate compare to the peer institution? So let's look at the IPEDS data set. Here we are on the IPEDS website. So if we look up an institution, I'm going to hit continue, and then we put in hit continue. Sorry, I have to select it. So here I can look at everything that the institution has, but I want to compare the institution to other similar institutions. So what I would do is click on by groups, and then click on things that make it similar to my institution. So I might look at geographical region and look at schools in the Mideast, the Carnegie classification of my institution, which this is a master's, college, and universities classification. Do you offer more master's degrees and baccalaureates, or just baccalaureates, or are you more a doctoral research institution? The degree of urbanization, which would be suburban, large, institutional size, and you can see up here it's giving me institutions that are similar to my institution. And then if I search that, I've now gotten about 39 institutions that are similar to my institution in terms of size. And what I can do there is then look at those respective institutions and determine their graduation and retention rates in comparison to mine. So that's how you can use the IPEDS data source. In conclusion, I hope you realize the importance of program outcomes and how to include them in your assessment plan using institutional data. Also, it's important to understand how program outcomes data influences other parts of the plan. Retention, graduation, and employment statistics don't live by themselves. They're not independent of each other. So it's important that if you're gathering this information, you understand how it may or may not inform your curriculum and make changes to boost retention, graduation, and employment by changing or revising the curriculum. And finally, it's my hope that you took away from this presentation the importance of how to utilize data to inform the curriculum and program functions, but doing it in a more efficient and effective way so it becomes part of your annual process and not just done when asked for a specialized accreditation report, but more done so it's annual and improvements can be seen and made to demonstrate student success and how you contribute to that mission of your institution, but down on the ground level within your academic program. Thank you for your attention. Please feel free to reach out to me via email if you have questions or if you'd like to learn more about what we spoke about today.